Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming out with another build guide, and this time it's for the Tri or Quad Freezing Pulse Totem Scion or Ascendant, and this is for the 3.0 beta. I made a video updating a little bit on this character, but this is going to be kind of like the full guide slash run through. So I guess I'll just start with the basic build premise. It's just a Freezing Pulse Totem build that uses Soul Mantle. And we basically use Soul Mantle not really to get an additional totem, although that's nice damage, but to get an extra link on the totem slot so we don't have to do Spell Totem. And also it makes the totems a lot tankier because now Soul Mantle, well, it was in 2.6 as well, but it's a level 20 Spell Totem, and you get the 50% increased totem life. So it's a pretty substantial life gain on the totems and makes them pretty tanky. To mitigate the negative effects of the Soul Mantle, we run a Sulfur Flask of Warding and a Quicksilver of Warding. You don't need to run 2 Warding Flasks, although with the boss HP change when you're at lower gear levels, it can take a kind of a while to kill some of the bosses, so I would say running 2 isn't that bad early on. Other notable flasks are pretty much just the Wise Oak for the pen, and yeah. So we'll go over the links. Faster casting, pretty much mandatory. Cold pen, mandatory. Freezing pulse, increased critical strikes, controlled destruction. And then in the 6th link, you can have either like crit multi or minion totem elemental. Minion totem elemental is probably the better choice here. Or you can use added cold as well now because added cold has been buffed. So that's another great option. Basically, if you want your totems to be tankier, you're going to probably want to use Minion Totem Elemental. And if you're just going for pure damage output, then added cold is great here. So other gear, we'll just go over. So I use Wind of Change on a lot of these characters just for their projectile speed, because projectile speed is really invaluable to Freezing Pulse because it basically allows the damage drop off to continue well, to not begin until the freezing pulse is farther out, or to have less of a drastic effect on the damage of the spell. And these are pretty good because they also give life, which is nice. The reduced movement speed sucks. These aren't really a great roll, but it's beta, so I just kind of got what I could, and it was early on when I bought these. Nothing too special with the boots, although you do want to get the lab enchant if possible. Preferably, I think it's like the 120 crit if you haven't crit recently. And it's really good with Scion actually because with Scion you're never self-casting Orb of Storms to get your power charges, because just placing the totems gives you power charges, which is, okay, really bad RNG there. Okay, terrible RNG, but as you can see it's normally pretty easy to get power charges, but you just kind of got in a rut there. So that means that you won't have to worry about critting and losing your crit buff from the lab enchant on the boots. Nothing too special for the rings. For the rings, you can use the Kikazaru rings, I believe they're called, and then you won't have to run the warding stuff, and you're going to get a ton of damage when the curses are on you. I'm going to try this setup more in the future, probably within the next week or so, but I want to get another build going and get some more guys on the channel. So I've heard people talk about this, and at first I was sort of skeptical, because they nerfed. At first, it was obviously really good because there was no limit on the jewel, so you could have like 5 of those jewels in, or 8 of them, and you'd get the benefit, like the 20% increased damage per curse for each gem, which is absolutely bonkers. But now they reduced it to 1, so I think it's still good though because you can actually get a lot of curses on yourself, and if you get like a 20% damage one, if you have at least 6 curses, that's like 120% increased damage. It's pretty decent. The only thing is you're giving up both ring slots, but you're also kind of really nerfing curses that come on yourself, so that's pretty great, especially for annoying shit like temp chains and stuff like that. So it has its uses, definitely, but I'm going to have to experiment. The problem is these builds don't get a lot of life to begin with, so missing the life rolls on the rings can be kind of devastating, especially for hardcore. But I'd say especially on softcore, that's certainly a viable option. Just a standard neck, I would say. Pretty standard wands. I had voids, obviously, in the other temp league, but this is the beta, so right now we don't have access to voids right now, just using some pretty decent wands, but nothing too special. They're not as good as the last beta cycle. I just found amazing wands in that beta cycle, but these aren't quite as good. This one has a lot of projectile speed, so that's always good. But I normally don't focus too much on getting like a ton of prod speed on wands. Like the damage needs to be there first, and then the prod speed is sort of secondary. So like ideally in a late game wand you'd have prod speed, but when you're first starting out, probably not the most important thing. Helm, pretty simple, nothing really that crazy. But I want to go over some of the links now. So basically, right now I'm kind of really playing around with, what is this called? Arcane Surge in different places and trying to see where I like it best. So right now I have it in my Flame Dash, which I have like linked with increased duration and faster casting. So I think that one is a pretty good option unless they nerf or make it not usable with a movement skill. Then I think that's always going to be a pretty solid option to have it in. If you're running Orb of Storms because you're not doing a Scion version of this build, then that's another solid option as well. I also have it in right now with Rallying Cry and Frostbite. Now, you don't want to have this setup in the Helm, like in your actual build, because Scion, via the Ascendancy, basically gives you skills in your Helm can have one additional totem summoned at each time. So you obviously want to have another Freezing Pulse totem in here, but right now, like where I'm kind of just testing stuff out with a build, so that's why I have this stuff in here. So you're not going to be able to run all of these Arcane Surges basically because you're not going to have enough like links and stuff like that. And obviously the Freezing Pulse totem you'd run here would be Spell Totem, Freezing Pulse, faster casting, and then what do you call it? You can actually run like LE Focus, but you're probably better off just running Controlled Destruction. But LE Focus might be better because you're going to get more damage out of it, and you're not going to be freezing anything anyways with that totem in your Helm, because it's probably going to be a boss-only totem regardless. And you're going to want, late game, you're going to want to use the Essence of Horror on your Helm and try and craft a Helm that has like implicit 30% more elemental damage. And that'll make that totem quite substantially fairly powerful. It'll have like I think 111k DPS I simmed out. So that's pretty good that you're just like adding for free. And I think that's why this Hierophant node actually is kind of like the best node in terms of like raw damage that you could get out of the entire Scion cluster. And I'm going to get into Ascendancies more a little bit later, but I just want to go over the rest of the links. So then I have Frostbomb, Arcane Surge, Increased Duration. This is one that you're going to definitely probably drop because you're just not casting Frostbomb enough to be relevant, and it's probably going to be up from your movement skill anyway, the Arcane Surge, so that's probably not a big deal. You definitely want this Frenzy setup, though. You could probably normally put this in your wand and have the 4-link open. Right now I just have a Lightning Golem in there, like toss it in kind of randomly. But the reason why I have it in here is because this is already like a half green, half blue, and the wand is like all blue, so obviously it'd be hard to get the links. But this is basically just because with how easy it is to generate power charges by just basically placing the totems, like you're never gonna run out of charges. Because the 50% chance to get in charge when you drop a totem is just amazing. So since you're never gonna run out of charges, you're really freed up to use other skills. And I just have a Frenzy Charge Generator. It's pretty decent because it's basically 12% more damage and then 12% cast speed, which is pretty good. I also have Rallying Cry in. This is something that I'd obviously like to keep, and you can definitely keep the Rallying Cry itself. It's more of like whether it's going to be attached to Arcane Surge or not, because there's probably not going to be enough links. But it's fine not being attached to Arcane Surge. I just kind of get the idea because there's this thing with Berserkers going on now. With they put like Arcane Surge on their Warcry, and they take the Warcry duration node, and they get insane amounts of duration on Arcane Surge. But we're obviously not a Berserker, so it doesn't really affect us much. But Rallying Cry is still good regardless because it gives more damage, and you won't really kill yourself because you're playing a totem build. So even if you run into Reflect, like the totems are just going to die, not you. And on top of that, it gives mana regen, which is nice for this build, because it is a mind over matter build. So sometimes your mana can get a bit low. And then for the auras, we basically just have Herald of Ice, Discipline, and Clarity. Now, you pretty much need Clarity. The level is going to be dependent on like how good your other gear is. My gear is kind of trash right now. I don't have any mana regen on anything, so that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, right now I need the Clarity for leveled. Discipline, you don't obviously need it, but it's just like a good defensive curse, I would say. It gives some effective HP. I feel like of all these curses, you could really drop a Herald of Ice and be mostly fine. Because you don't really have that much mana here for Moam, and I'm still kind of playing around with this. It's definitely something you could take out if you wanted to. Like, we'll see if we take that curse off. We go to, yeah, like about 1200 mana, so that's kind of a lot better in terms of your mana that you have for Mind Over Matter. So it'd probably be a good idea to remove Herald of Ice, because even though, like, the thing that's tempting about using these heralds and stuff like that, any sorts of added damage, is that Freezing Pulse scales really well off the added damage in terms of damage effectiveness, right? But because Freezing Pulse is in a totem, uh, it's getting a huge cast speed penalty from the totem, so it's not like you're self-casting Freezing Pulse, so you're not really getting like the full benefit of that damage effectiveness. Now you are using multiple totems, so that's something to be said about that as well. Like you're essentially getting like kind of like 3 casts off because there's multiple totems there. But you could definitely take it out, and I don't think you would notice like a huge difference in the build. Another thing I want to mention about this build is that it's definitely less effective than it was previously because of the boss HP change. And little extra things like Herald of Ice are now, I would say, not as important as they were. Because before, when you had terrible gear, you were trying to basically get as much cold damage as possible, which meant making sure you got cold damage to spells and your wands and stuff like that, or your dagger or whatever. Because like every little bit counted towards freezing those bosses, right? But now that the bosses have double the HP, it's just very hard to freeze bosses that are actually dangerous anymore, right? Like you can freeze early map bosses and stuff like that, but you're not going to be freezing anything in red maps, I doubt. So with that being said, it's kind of like you're not going to necessarily need all these little extra chunks of cold damage, so you could probably definitely go without Hell Device. So that's pretty much the build itself. And then in terms of like the other ascendancy, you can either go Deadeye, I'd say, or Assassin are probably the best two. Elementalist just doesn't really give enough because you don't get the actual conflux, and you get another golem, but it's not buffed in any shape or form, and you don't get the reflect reduction on the totems, I don't think, and even if you did, it's not really the biggest deal in the world. And the 6% pen is nice, but it's not a lot of damage. The assassin basically gives 1.5 chance to crit, which really helps your crit chance, and you get the crit multi on enemies that are on full life. It's pretty amazing. And going either Shadow or Ranger basically means that you're going to get dexterity from these nodes. And that's fairly important because you don't get a lot of dex just doing the build path itself. And you're going to need dex for things like cold penetration and stuff like that. So it's really great. Probably save you an extra point there. In terms of where I'm going to place the last 2 points, so the other good thing about going Assassin is if you finish out and take Path of the Shadow, you can actually forego a lot of the Scion Start. Now, the Scion Start does have access to the health wheel, so if you're trying to get a lot more health, the Scion Start, I guess, isn't bad, but I still feel like there's just a lot of inefficient points being spent here, right? Like, this mana is not really that good. The mana regen, not really that good. Obviously, you're making up for it because you get some jewel sockets, which is nice, but I'd say unless you have some really good jewels to put in there, it's probably not worth it. You also have access to this totem cluster, which is definitely nice. But yeah, I think what I'm going to do here is take Path of the Shadow and then just start from Shadow, basically. Like, I'll use the 3 points that I'm going to get, fill out this, and then just regret everything over here, and just put it into more jewel sockets and other places and damage. So I'll get this next power charge. There was some more damage. Oh yeah, this totem shit over here. Possibly some cast speed. These jewel sockets. So there's basically lots of other jewel sockets and stuff like that you can get. So that's how I think I'm going to finish the build out. How do I feel it compares to the other versions of the build? Well, having the power charges being generated by placing the totems is obviously a huge advantage. Now, it's not quite as big as it was because there's things like the brine rot flag in the game and the trap shield, and that helps you sustain power charges quite well, especially if you don't have void batteries, because if you don't have void batteries, you're not going to have the extra power charge, which means that you don't have to worry about being down a charge when you weapon swap back. And then, because when you do that, you basically end up needing to use Orb of Storms anyways to get your final charge. So when you're not using like void batteries or something like that, the weapon swap thing feels fine. So while it is definitely an advantage not having to weapon swapping it just isn't really that difficult to begin with. So I'm not really sure how I feel about it yet. I don't really think that I like the loss of damage in exchange for the convenience, because it ends up being such a minor convenience. But that's the main selling point of this build, I would say, is the power charge generation. That and there's a lot in this node that's actually quite strong. Like, this is pretty much the node that makes your build, right? Like, the max mana is really good for Mind Over Matter, obviously. And then 10% of your mana as extra maximum energy shield is great. And having the extra totem in your helm is quite a decent DPS increase once you get the Horror Essence, especially. So you are making up for damage there, for sure. And it's easier to generate the Frenzy charges because you don't have to worry about Orb of Storms or weapon swapping at all. So I'd say it's definitely like interesting. I still need to actually do the Uber lab and convert everything over, take all the points out and reconfigure them so I can get my kind of final damage value. And I also really want to upgrade to a 6-link Soul Mantle. Unfortunately, with the Uber lab, I'm at like a decent level right now, and I've also leveled some other characters. I still have not found all the Uber trials. I should probably just buy the one that I need, but I figured I would get it relatively quickly, because I normally never have a problem. But I've been just getting really RNG fucked in this particular time, so yeah, I have like one more trial I need to complete, and then I'll do Uber Lab, and I'll get those points, and I'll make another updated video then. But I just wanted to get this out there for now, because it's still like early beta, and people are still trying to find things to play. So I figured I'd just throw this up there, and I can always just make amendments to it later. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so and just in terms of the comparison, so the DPS is like, I'd say it's close to the Inquis version, actually, if you're counting, because you have to keep in mind we're getting the free pen from the Wise Oak and the Frostbomb the Inquisitor isn't getting, especially against things that like aren't Shaper. Well, actually, no, those help on Shaper because the pen goes through no matter what, so yeah. So yeah, the damage is pretty comparable when I simmed it. Elementalist does more damage than both, but Inquisitor is going to have faster clear, most likely because of the Instruments of Virtue, especially if you're using like shield charge with it. So there's that. But yeah, if you count the 4th totem in with this build, then this build probably actually has more single target damage than any of the other builds, or at least it's close with Elementalists. But it does require placing down that extra totem, and getting the 4 totems out can kind of be a pain in the ass. Obviously on some bosses like Vol, it's not an issue at all, but there's other bosses that move around a bunch, and yeah, just like getting 4 totems down, you're not going to get as much effective damage as you really think, right? So something to keep in mind. I like it though. Actually, I'd say the main turnoff right now is the leveling experience. I have to just figure out how to level it better, because I had pretty bad RNG leveling this character, and it was kind of like just a pain to do the content as starting Scion, because basically you want to get dual totem as fast as possible, right? Which involves going through the mana, and you don't go through the spell damage to get to the totems, which means that even if you get to the totems and you want to take the spell damage, like you're putting in points over here to get damage quick, and you're just not progressing towards the rest of your damage. So it's just a pain to start. I'm gonna be trying some different things possibly. You could start even Sunder. I did SRS. It wasn't. I did SRS into Flame Blast, and it wasn't like super bad once you got to Flame Blast, but it definitely doesn't do anywhere near the damage that Elementalist does. So yeah, leveling's definitely quicker as like Witch or Templar or something. But yeah, still not too bad overall. Obviously not like a terrible build to level with. Now I'm gonna be trying a bunch of new things. So if you're starting with somebody else, they can give you like a Firestorm or something too. There's even less problems there. So, but that's pretty much it. Think yeah, that just about covers it. So if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to leave it in the comments, and talk to you guys later.